Hello, I'm Mr. EpiX. Today I'll talk about Ahri, the nine-tailed fox. Ahri is a mage assassin who thrives at catching unsuspecting targets on their own, but she is also a champion who is good at teamfighting. She's great at bursting people down while still being safe because of her mobility. In this video I will discuss her abilities and the skill order of them, the reasons to pick Ahri, runes, masteries and items. I will also talk about how to play her in certain scenarios, as well as going a bit more in depth for some tips and tricks. Ahri's abilities heavily synergize with her Q and are focused on giving her the tools to hit it reliably through skilled play. First, however, let's go through her passive. Essence Theft gives Ahri a stack whenever she hits an enemy with an ability, up to 3 stacks per cast. When reaching 9 stacks, her next ability heals her for each enemy hit. This is something you want to pay attention to when playing Ahri, especially during the laning phase. You generally want to use this with your Q to give you more sustain. If you plan your harass, last hitting and pushing, you can hit an empowered Q on a few extra targets to give you some more health back. Orb of Deception is Ahri's signature ability which her kit revolves around and is her main source of both poke and damage. Ahri throws out an orb in a target direction, dealing magic damage to all enemies hit, and then pulls it back to herself, dealing true damage to enemies hit on the way back. Landing this is crucial when trying to fight because of the large part of Ahri's damage that it makes up, especially from the second hit. While the Q is traveling, Ahri also gains a burst of movement speed that decays over the duration, which among other things lets her escape and chase more easily. Ahri's W, Foxfire, spawns 3 flames that orbit her for 5 seconds. The flames seek out and deal magic damage to nearby enemies, prioritizing champions first and Ahri's basic attack target second, if any. Multiple flames can hit the same target, but flames beyond the first one only deal 30% of the full damage. Charm is Ahri's maybe most iconic ability. Ahri blows a kiss in a target direction to charm the first target hit, dealing magic damage, but more importantly it makes them slowly walk towards her for 1 to 2 seconds depending on the current rank. This ability does not go through minions however, so you should use it carefully and look for the opportunities where you can hit it on your opponent without wasting the important cooldown and losing the pressure it gives you by having it ready. Landing the charm on someone sets you up to reliably damage them with the rest of your combo, especially once you have your ultimate ability, Spirit Rush. Spirit Rush lets Ahri dash in a target direction, firing 3 bolts at the nearest enemies, dealing magic damage, similar to her W. Enemies can only be hit by 1 bolt each, but Ahri can dash 2 more times within 10 seconds of casting it, making her able to reposition very easily and dodge around the teamfight. It's often used to create a pick on someone, follow up on an engage, escape a tricky situation, or simply for the damage while getting close to your opponent. So now that we know her abilities, let's quickly go through the skill order of them. You start with skilling your Q unless you have a chance at picking someone off at level 1 for a quick invade kill, in which case you take E first. Otherwise, and normally, you take E on level 2 since it offers a lot more utility than Foxfire, which is mostly used as a follow-up damage when fighting. I like taking a second rank of Q on level 3 because of the same reason, and waiting with ranking W until level 4. Then the skill order will be prioritizing R above Q above W above E. Now we've looked at Ahri's abilities and we know how she works, but why do we want to pick her? What are the strengths and weaknesses of Ahri? She works in a lot of team compositions in the game, being able to adapt to comps focused on things such as strong all-in potential, as well as pick comps that excel at catching people and bursting them down. Overall, she's a great champion, especially for solo queue where you want to be adaptable to whatever team you get, and even more so against the enemy team. Ahri is a strong laner who can bully the opponent and snowball advantages very well. She has a lot of kill potential when her spells are off cooldown, which makes her a threat in all stages of the game. For the amount of kill pressure and power in her kit, she is a very safe champion to pick into almost anything. She has sustain, mobility, wave clear, enough to hold her own in the mid lane on top of her already amazing trading. Ahri's burst with a few items is very high, and if you can catch an enemy squishy, you can easily kill them with a combo and ignite. So if your team lacks an assassin or some burst, Ahri is a strong contender for the role. Even though Ahri is a solid pick most games, there are definitely scenarios where other champions shine more. Remember to consider things such as the damage distribution between magic and physical of your team, or whether you need some more consistent DPS in fights before picking her, because once she uses her burst, she has some seconds where she can't make a lot of plays. This brings me to another weakness that your opponent in most cases can play around. During fights, your main abilities are skill shots that aren't very spammable, namely your Q and your E. Either way, this means that if you miss the skill shots or simply don't hit the right targets, you won't be able to deal damage during the cooldowns. This might seem obvious, but is especially true for the ultimate, which limits Ahri's fighting immensely when on cooldown. This leads to one of her weaknesses being champions who can either survive the burst, outrange her, or dodge it reliably. Ahri is also quite weak when it comes to taking a punch, so if you manage to lock her down, she's gonna have a bad time. This is also why she has some trouble against champions who can reliably hit her with hard CC, such as Lysandra or Annie. So now we know exactly when to pick Ahri and how she works, but what runes do we want to use? I'm going to show a standard, cheap page for mages and then talk about how to adapt it to the team you're against if needed. Then I'm going to show you the page I use for most games when playing Ahri. The standard mage page has magic penetration marks, armor seals, magic resist glyphs and ability power quintessences. This page helps you with the stats you need in the majority of your games, especially when the enemy team has several threats split between magical and physical damage. There are some variations you can make to the page, but generally you want to keep the marks in quints. If you're against a team with only AD, you can swap the glyphs for scaling cooldown reduction per level. You can also run this and swap the seals for scaling health per level if you feel like you won't be having trouble being squishy early. If you're the player who roams a lot, or if you need a small boost with dodging pesky lux bindings in lane for the exchange of some AP, you can swap the quints for movement speed as well, in all combinations of these runes. The more you learn to adapt your runes to the game you're going into, the better results you will get. Here is the variation of the page I like to run, swapping armor for health per level, and some magic resist for 10% scaling CDR at level 18. This makes it very easy to get the 40 or 45% CDR that I'll get to in a moment through Masteries. For Masteries, there isn't a lot of variation for Ahri. You want to take Thunderlords every game unless you're crazy and think that she needs more mobility through Storm Raider's Surge, or if you want to play her as a poke mage with Deathfire Touch. Neither of these things are something I'd recommend. For points you go Savagery, Secret Stash, Merciless, Dangerous Game, Intelligence, and Thunderlords in the Cunning Tree. You could go for the magic penetration from Precision, if that's your style, but I've found that CDR is very useful on Ahri, since she's limited by her cooldowns to a large extent. In the Ferocity tree you take Sorcery, Feast, Natural Talent and Double-Edged Sword. You can take a Bounty Hunter if you feel like you can reliably snowball an advantage from lane and kill a few different people before too long into the game, but this is the page I run with. So let's talk about something more interesting. Items. For Ahri you generally want to start by building Morellonomicon. It's just such a good item for being aggressive. The amount of AP and mana that it gives, as well as the mana restore on kills and assists, really makes it the best mage item right now. Try to get at least 900 gold before the first back so you can afford the Lost Chapter, which will help you immensely with mana during the early laning phase. After the first item you can start branching out a bit, but most of the time you want to build Luden's Echo as your second item. If you're having trouble in lane against an AP, you can sneak in an Abyssal Scepter before your Luden's. It's a very good item on Ahri as well, or a Sonya's Hourglass if you're having trouble against an AD champ. How far you want to commit to these items is up to you. There are many cases where simply getting the Negatron Cloak or the Seeker's Arm Guard is enough until you finish another item. Usually you want to build the Sorcerer's Shoes somewhere in the mix of your first two items, unless you happen to be backing on perfect amounts of gold to get bigger item spikes. Rabadon's Death Cap is a good item for your third one, not counting boots, but some of the time the enemy team has built some magic resist, and if you feel like you're getting somewhat negated by that in fights, get yourself a Void Staff first. Item building is very dependent on each game, so don't follow this build path every single game. Here are some more items that can be useful depending on the game and situation. If your team really needs that extra tower pushing power that Lichbane provides, you can get that, or if you're up against 4 super tanks, the Endris could be worth considering. Keep in mind that these can be very playstyle specific, but feel free to try out something crazy. Let's go deeper. Ahri is somewhat straightforward at the first glance, but there are many things that go into mastering the champion. Positioning, mana management, and which skin to pick are just a few of those. When starting lane phase, you want to try to conserve your mana and balance your pushing. What I mean by this is that you want to look at the amount of minions and their health to get a good grasp of where the lane will push. Adapt your amount of auto attacking and pushing with Q to your estimation of where the lane will go, while still last hitting for gold. Make sure to not get too pushed in and lose last hits to the tower early, and if you have to use Q to push the wave back, try to hit your opponent as well, and throw in an auto attack for the Thunderlord's proc. Try to get the Thunderlord's proc on your opponent as often as possible with the Q and auto attack whenever it's off cooldown. You can obviously also use your other spells, but don't get too ahead of yourself and use up your mana without being able to kill them or force them back. A very good general tip about harassing in lane is that it's only worth it if you end up in a better situation than them afterwards, relative to before the harass of course. If you lose more mana, health, or miss more last hits than them because you're too focused on trying to kill them, it's often not worth it. In early laning phase, try to keep track of how close you are to 6, and once you start getting close, you want to try to bring the opponent down a bit, so you can immediately all-in them when you get your ult. This catches a lot of people off guard and can often get you an easy kill if you play it right. Once you have your ultimate, you should start to look for roams whenever it's ready. This isn't to say you shouldn't roam before 6, but 3 dashes can go a long way when helping out your bot lane for example. Try to also set up the lane so you don't lose too many creeps when leaving it. Push it out and try to keep track of the enemy's vision of you as you leave to gank. Making it obvious that you're trying to get a double kill bot lane often makes it harder. As mentioned briefly when going through her abilities, having your charm ready holds a lot of power over your opponent. If your opponent in lane knows that you can throw a hard CC at them and follow up with a lot of damage, they will be hesitant to get out of their minion wave. The point I want to make is that it's important to know that sometimes having your charm ready is more important than hitting it, because psychologically your opponent will play around you having it available. If you dash in on someone to kill them, 90% of the time the first thing they will do is try to dodge your charm, so don't throw it. Make them run back and forth while taking damage from everything else and use it only when you know you can hit it. Very often people will basically kill themselves to try to dodge it. This also goes for many other abilities in the game that have the same nature of hard CC skill shots, blitz and thresh hooks, Morgana and Lux bindings, etc. It's all a mind game, so play around them playing around you having your abilities ready. Let's get into some more mechanical tricks that you can practice. My favorite trick on Ahri is the Charm Flash. A lot of champions have skills with a certain wind-up animation that makes it possible to throw them and then flash, making the enemies have a severely reduced time to react to the spell. Here is a side-by-side comparison followed by a couple of plays making use of this trick. Tying back to the start of the video, let me tell you a trick for her passive. Firstly, I'll once more remind you that it's important to remember to keep track of when you have it ready for healing up, but here's a neat trick you can use when you're low and out of minions to heal from. Throw it into the jungle. Hell, even ward it up the first few times to make sure you're hitting as many raptors as possible. You better use your ears now, because here are a couple of Q-tips. Okay, that was bad, I'm sorry. Remember that your Q always comes back to you. This means that you can manipulate the movement of your Q mid-air by ulting, but also by using flash. Getting the hit on the way back is more important than when throwing it out because of the true damage. You can also use the movement speed from the Q to get around the map more quickly when roaming. Hopefully this video has helped you figure out something new about Ahri. If you have any thoughts on the video, more questions or suggestions what type of video I should do next, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks for watching and I will see you on the Summoner's Rift.